Some years are harder than others, and sometimes reading can be even more of a lifeline. Words like stable outcroppings in turbulent water, footholds on the cliffside, books as ballast that keeps one from drifting upwards, spinning untethered from the earth's surface. And the best ones remind one that there are always new depths of beauty to be discovered, and that language always has a future tense. And so I wanted to share some of the best I read this year with you. Just like previous years, this list is only going to contain fiction, and I have a rule that anything I include has to be something I read for the first time this year, so none of my rereading is going to be accounted for here. I've tried to limit the list to things that I'd be interested in revisiting at some point in the future. Please be sure to leave your favourite reads in the comments. I always love discovering new things from all of you. There's a certain kind of novel that gained currency in the early 20th century. Its instances together form a genre without a name, or at least a genre that hasn't been named to my satisfaction. I usually describe it in this way. Penniless young man of artistic persuasion wanders urban metropolis, spiraling into dissociative torpor/frenzy, ultimately committing some act of obscenity or violence. I think the roots of the genre are perhaps in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, but there are glimmers of it too in Edgar Allan Poe's Man of the Crowd. But it really comes to fruition with works like Knut Hamsun's Hunger, Stanisław Przybyszewski's Der Schrei, Hjalmar Söderberg's Dr. Glass, Ernesto Sabato's The Tunnel. I reach for the terms flânerie or novel of urban alienation, but neither seem to capture what these novels do collectively. The work I want to talk about first is a kind of late-blooming recapitulation of this familiar tale. I'm talking about Peter Handke's The Goalkeeper's Anxiety at the Penalty Kick, and it's a book that feels very much rooted in this tradition. It's a novel of aimlessness, of urban and suburban wandering, of outward meaninglessness, inward collapse. Its protagonist, however, is of a rather different stripe to the one we usually find. Bloch is not the frenzied intellectual, but a character whose body has been the locus of life. An ex-goalkeeper, now manual labourer, who at the beginning of the novel is fired from his job on a building site. In this choice of such a character for a story about mental deterioration, the progress of Handke's novel resembles Georg Büchner's Wojciech, wherein, as George Steiner has commented about that play, the weight of mental strain experienced by the protagonist outstrips his powers of expression. I think what often appeals to me about such books is their sparseness. There is little in the way of plot, very few events as such, and often a minimal cast of characters. What seems to be left then is environment and internality, a sharpening focus on the misalignment of language and world. Expression and doubt become entangled in a frustrated dance of hyper-alertness to meaning, as when, for example, Bloch attempts to conduct an ordinary conversation with some women about the familiar subject of football. When he mentioned a corner kick that had been awarded by a referee, he felt he owed them an explanation that he was not talking about the corner of a room. The longer he talked, the less natural what he said seemed to Bloch. Gradually, it began to seem that every word needed an explanation. He had to watch himself so that he didn't get stuck in the middle of a sentence. A couple of times when he thought out a sentence, even while he said it, he made a slip of the tongue. He'd also forgotten the surroundings more and more. He'd even stopped noticing the child and the dog in the next room, but when he began to hesitate and did not know how to go on, and finally search for sentences he might still say, the surroundings became conspicuous again, and he noticed details everywhere. And for me, this misalignment was the core interest of Handke's text. Very rapidly, the details that occasion Bloch's dissociative spiral, his inward collapse, are dealt with. The loss of his job, his obsession with a cashier at the local cinema, his pursuit and spontaneous murder of her, his flight from Vienna to the provinces. The focus shifts rapidly inward, and this internal disorder begins to infect the novel's syntax and grammar, spreading like some virulent disease. The language grows polyps, its motor functions stunted, expression is palsied and fractured. Sentences end or begin abruptly, trail off, or at one stage even dissolve into images and symbols. Handke's iteration of the tale, his entry into the tradition, has the drama play out on a stage suspended in the widening chasm between signifier and signified. The breakdown's static interference affects the very medium in which the tale is conveyed, its ghosts, artifacts, and distortions gradually dialing inwards to consume the page. Some worlds disappear irrevocably. Though traces remain, their reconstruction at the hands of the historian, the archivist, the memoirist, requires a profound imaginative act. For me, this is what Aidan Scott's novel, The Fisherman, represents. He's an Australian novelist, and he's composing this book at a great remove, both geographical and temporal, from its setting of late 19th century Whitby. From my conversations with the author, however, there are blood ties that close this gap for him. His family, several generations back, originally coming from Yorkshire. The disappeared world that Scott's novel conjures is a harsh one. Traditional fishing families operating with coble and net in the age of emergent industrial-scale trawlers. The men set out at early morning in all weathers. The women comb the rocky coast, its high promontories, for flithers with which to bait the lines. Subsistence living, the sale of the day's catch in a market square must suffice to survive another day. It's clear that Scott has undertaken meticulous research to reconstruct this world, and he takes a refreshingly open-hearted approach to the task, leading the reader to his sources in footnotes and an afterword. He draws on local histories, glossaries of Yorkshire dialectal speech, which Scott has a real ear for, and perhaps most interestingly, the work of the Whitby photographer Frank Meadows Sutcliffe, some of whose work is printed in the book, and who even appears as a minor character in the narrative. His photographs are very striking, capturing wonderfully details of landscape, weather, and atmosphere, but also dress, labour, community, and even, though perhaps more obliquely in his portraits, vestiges of character, flickers of internality. I feel grateful to have been introduced to his work. For all its focus on historical accuracy, the book provides other entry points into its world. The protagonist, Rowan, is also an outsider to this Whitby community, arriving there by marrying into a fishing family. But he is also an outsider in other senses, of sensitive temperament in a brutal environment, drawn to introspection, and is tentative among those who speak their mind plainly. Most powerfully, he is tortured by his divergence from sexual norms, by his longing to be held by others of his kind. His pain, at times, flares violently to the surface, as when he watches a farmhand at work and is filled with desire. The wool clings to the farmhand's skin, and Rowan can see the outline of the man's body, and from the dark corner he hides in, it looks as though it has been moulded from antique clay, fingers slipping to shape the contours of a body, along a spine and between the shoulder blades. In shaping it, the body is given life. He is drowned in fixation and yearning. He clasps his brow as though he would roll back the skin and crack open the skull to release whatever foulness he feels is clinging there. Scott's painterly evocation of weather, landscape and environment is also one of the great pleasures of the book. His prose bears a striking McCarthyian influence, which is well matched to the ruggedness of the Yorkshire coast, the heaviness of its weather, and which provides a kind of grand elemental reflection of the turmoil within his characters. This is particularly effective in the very short, sketch-like chapters, each one an exquisite miniature, or to borrow Edmund White's comment on the novel, a dark woodcut. He finds her in the woods one evening below the moors when the sky is blooming red and copper like the head of a spade drawn fresh from its creation forge. The thought of it makes his mouth taste of metal, of iron and bronze. A light drizzle falls from drear clouds where they sit like a lake in the middle of the sky. Late in the book there is an extended and extraordinarily beautiful passage quoted from the 9th Bridgewater Treatise by the 19th century mathematician and philosopher Charles Babbage. It concerns the imperishability of matter, waves, breath, each disturbance in the universal fabric, the utterance, the gesture, the deed, echoing outward eternally to the outer edge of space, dying out only in the consuming and final heat death of the universe. That same thread is the human one that links us to the disappeared world Scott has reconstructed. Those actions and words adrift still, their ghosts passing unregarded through each of us. In his essay on Dante, T.S. Eliot asserted that genuine poetry can communicate before it is understood. For me, there are some books that function in this way, books that made me feel lost, somewhat dazed, but absolutely certain that I'm in good hands, that I have only to trust the author. This was certainly the case for me with Death in Spring by the Catalan language novelist Mercè Rodoreda. I often had the impression while reading it that it was almost impenetrable. Often I would feel lost, but even more often I'd feel cradled, buoyed up by its poetic beauty. I've asked myself why it feels this way exactly. It's not a difficult book on the level of the sentence. Its expression is lucid, its action rarely unclear. But there's always a feeling of dwelling in allegorical territory, the world it conjures gesturing towards another unannounced meaning. One has the sense of its being built on a private, hermetic symbolism, wherein the objects of its world become totemic. Colm Toybin, in his introduction, describes this quality well when he compares Death in Spring to an ominous painting by Miro, made up of some essential elements: tree, lake, fire, mountain, wind, summer, winter, blood. I would add to this list river, bees, sundial, worm, skin. Out of these elements, Rodoreda stitches together a dark, hallucinatory world that feels both cryptic and resonant. It's set in an isolated rural community, but recast in an oniric, folkloric mode. Our young, unnamed narrator is our guide to this world only in a partial sense. Through the novel's course, he is initiated into its secrets, but any complete explanation is always withheld, leaving readers to fend for themselves at a distance. One peculiar thing about it is that emotions are very rarely stated overtly. Instead, its obscure rituals, customs, and hierarchies stand in their place, communicating them with a force that is felt in the blood. The men of the village who dive ritually into the river, their faces torn and mutilated by the sharp rocks under the surface, the resulting group of faceless villagers, partial outcasts who live on the peripheries of the community, talking to no one, taking their meals together, the shadowy figure of Senor, a village elder, whose house, alone atop the hill, is bedecked with ivy that resembles a wave of blood, the forest of the dead, the trees split to become organic tombs, opened up to house dying bodies. I grasped the axe and began to unbar my father's tree, top to bottom, side to side. It was soft. Trees that held the dead inside were like rubber, hard to breach. I pulled as hard as I could. Then it all spilled out, bark and rotted flesh, and a watery mixture, black sweat from the body. At eye level stood the decomposing heart, partially attached to the chest by 4 veins, and above it the mouth sealed with a rose-coloured cement. Deep within lay a damp smudge of brighter pink cement. The flayed knees were bent, the bones twisted. Further up, the face, rotted fruit, forehead stripped clean, seemed to be laughing. I dreamt my father's breath was burning me. Many have read the book in allegorical terms, seeing the life in the village as a kind of surreal recasting of Franco's Spain. And it's true that Rodorreda's life was deeply impacted by war and dictatorships, shaped by political power and violence. She fled Spain towards the end of the Civil War, and after a period of exile in France was also forced to flee Nazi occupation, eventually settling in Geneva. The very language in which she composed was also under threat. As Toybin notes, she had not merely lost Catalonia, but she was writing in a time when Catalan was effectively banned by Franco, consigned to the private realm. She wrote her best novels at a time when they had little chance of finding many readers. She wrote in a language which was alert to silence, danger, fragility. And there is a kind of fragile hope in this unfinished novel that stands as a subtle counterpoint to its horrors. It's grappling with the possibility of breaking cycles of violence, of being attentive to the world's small beauties, conscious that the same river whose currents mutilate the body also transport stars and pieces of moon. Some great writers don't produce very much work in their lifetimes. I find the ones who build towering reputations despite a slim output particularly fascinating. And this is certainly the case with Juan Rulfo, the innovative Mexican writer who published only 3 literary works in his lifetime, most famously Pedro Páramo. This is a book that we covered a long while back on Sherd's podcast, so I'll leave a little link in the description if you'd like to listen to that discussion. But everything I've read by him is of such depth and resonance that I was utterly thrilled to read the Burning Plain this year, his earlier collection of short stories. As its title suggests, The Burning Plain is a work of parched, sun-bleached lyricism, its tales often sparse and tersely composed, but with flashes of outlandish, alien beauty, as though it were an embodiment of the desert landscape that is its backdrop. Vast, sterile expanses, punctuated with sudden bursts of colour, flowering plants, a flock of chachalacas, the blood pooling around a dead man's head. And the land itself is absolutely central to the book in quite a number of ways. Its style and concerns are intimately bound up with its arid landscape. Its language growing out of that baked expanse, dry roots that clutch. The way of life the stories depict, too, seem extensions of the land's inhospitable demands. These are tales of brutality, poverty, of pursuit and exploitation. The opening tale, "They Have Given Us This Land," sets the tone for the collection, announcing that bond between land and lives. After long hours of walking without seeing even the shadow of a tree, nor a sapling, nor even a root of anything, you hear dogs barking. There have been moments along this unmarked path when you imagined that there wouldn't be anything up ahead on the opposite side of this plain that's been scarred by cracks and bone-dry arroyos. In the wake of agrarian reforms following the Mexican Revolution, the story's characters have been offered a piece of high, barren land to cultivate, where it does not rain, where nothing will grow. The bleak hostility of the landscape echoed by a terminal inner desolation. How is hope to flourish where not a sapling nor a root can take hold? This feeling of a land in ruins, in a state of misery and desolation, runs through the entire book, and at times foreshadows the sunstruck Gothicism of Pedro Páramo. This is particularly the case in my favourite story from the collection, Luvina. It's the tale in this collection that feels most like a ghost story. Much of its narrative emerges in a barroom dialogue as the spectral, miserable town of Luvina is sketched in tones of admonition, grim warnings from one who knows this place to one headed there. It's a forgotten town, a town failed by the nation, its inhabitants in dire poverty, suffering a kind of death in life. Again, the land and the elements take centre stage. You'll see soon enough the wind that blows in Luvina. It's dingy, they say, on account of all the volcanic dust it drags around. But the truth is that wind is black. It scratches as if it had fingernails. You hear it morning and night, hour after hour without respite, scraping the walls, pulling up clumps of earth, until you feel it beginning to swarm inside you, as if it were working to loosen the very hinges of your bones. The story has that same feeling of distended dread, that purgatorial left-behindness that Pedro Páramo conjures so well, but condensed into this short and intense piece of prose. It culminates in the recounting of a desperate night spent within an empty church as the wind seethes around its stone walls and the deathly women of Luvina emerge with rebosos draped over their heads, their black outlines set against the black backdrop of the night. And like the decaying town, the narrative undergoes its own process of decay, its details so corrosive to the storyteller's psyche that it may not, cannot be finished. Instead, its frayed threads are left dangling, the text itself revealed to be woven from worm-eaten, infested fabric. Well then, as I was saying, but he didn't say anything. He just stared at a certain spot on the table where the termites, now wingless, moved about in circles like naked little worms. I don't want by any means to suggest that this collection is a kind of trial run in the lead up to Pedro Páramo. It's far more than that, and there were times when I think I enjoyed it even more than that incredible novel. And it gives a strong sense of Rolfo's range as a writer, and how at home he is in the shorter form, able to conjure extraordinarily powerful and memorable worlds with a few deft brushstrokes. I highly recommend it. On the 27th of August 1984, in Santiago de Chile, a man walked into the editorial offices of the magazine Causa with something to confess. What he revealed to the editors there would unearth a world cloaked in shadow, drag hidden horrors out into unflinching daylight. This is the pivotal moment with which The Twilight Zone by Chilean writer Nona Fernandez begins. The man in question was Andrés Antonio Valenzuela Morales, a deserter from the Chilean armed forces during the horrendous and violent Pinochet dictatorship, who, unable to live with the horrors in which he had participated, decided to make a public confession. The magazine ran with the headline, "I tortured people." Fernandez recounts her first encounter with the publication, whose details remained fixed in her memory.
Eran hojas y hojas con información detallada sobre lo que había hecho, con nombres de agentes, de prisioneros, de delatores, con direcciones de centros de detención, con la ubicación de lugares donde se enterraron cuerpos, con la especificidad de métodos de tortura, con el relato de muchos operativos. Páginas color celeste, lo recuerdo bien, en las que entré por un momento a una especie de realidad paralela, infinita y oscura, un universo inquietante que intuíamos ahí afuera, escondido más allá de los límites del liceo y de nuestras casas, en el que todo ocurría bajo una lógica pauteada por las reglas del encierro y las ratas.
This opening of a breach in the mundane, this sudden flood of darkness into the everyday, this collision of parallel worlds, is the fulcrum of Fernandez's novel, which draws heavily on the author's own life and experiences growing up as a child during the regime. In an interview with the Cervantes Institute Dublin, she recounts this feeling that the two worlds may not have been so distant after all.
Cuando era niña, no tan niña, pero qué sé yo, a los 13 años, 14 años, apareció en una revista de oposición de ese tiempo, apareció el rostro de un agente de inteligencia que decía: yo torturé. Y claro, sabíamos en ese tiempo que se torturaba, era una realidad, pero jamás había imaginado quiénes eran esas personas, esos monstruos que hacían ese tipo de cosas. Y de pronto aparece este hombre que era un caballero súper normal. O sea, de hecho yo me recuerdo, se parecía mucho a mi profesor de ciencias de ese tiempo. Yo decía, esta gente es gente normal, o sea, gente como mi profesor de ciencias, como, qué sé yo, el almacenero de la esquina.
And this feeling of the coexistence of two worlds, side by side, but unknown to each other, becomes a kind of organizing principle of the novel. Alongside the pursuit of the former intelligence agent, letters to him, reimaginings of his flight from Chile, his moral turmoil, Fernandez finds a curious way to convey the subtle distance and proximity of those atrocities committed in the shadows. As a child at the time, Fernandez appears largely sheltered from these horrors, and yet they find their way into her world, seeping through the widening fissures of her reality, a ghostly, peripheral malevolence that slips in via overheard conversations, whispers, near misses. To understand this coexistence of realities, Fernandez uses the media and pop culture with which she grew up, science fiction and space travel as extended metaphors, episodes of The Twilight Zone, the flight of Yuri Gagarin, Ghostbusters. All these things become portals into the unreality of the regime, mirrors to the fiction it wove out of silence and fear. the fiction that its illegitimate arrests, detainments, its surveillance, its torture, execution, disposal of bodies and bones in obscure locations, in the desert, as if all these things did not exist. And I was really impressed by the way these metaphors functioned in the book, the way they conveyed the regime's construction of an alternative reality, the portal's ingresses and egresses through its delicate looking glass, but also, crucially, to foreground mediation. Mediation as a metaphor for transgenerational trauma. When Fernandez writes of attending a showing of a documentary she'd worked on about the vicariate of solidarity, she describes how even the indirect experience of the dictatorship's horrors takes root in the consciousness, spreading its venom through subsequent generations.
Yo no soy protagonista de lo que veo. No estuve ahí. No tengo diálogos ni participación en el argumento. Las escenas proyectadas en esta sala son ajenas, pero siempre han estado cerca, pisándome los talones. Quizá por eso las considero parte de mi historia. Nací con ellas instaladas en el cuerpo, incorporadas en un álbum familiar que no elegí ni organicé. En la sucesión veloz de acontecimientos en la que habito, en el torbellino de imágenes que consumo y desecho a diario, estas se han mantenido intactas frente al tiempo y el olvido. Como si fueran controladas por una fuerza de gravedad distinta, no flotan ni salen disparadas en el espacio, dando tumbos sin dirección.
This commingling of different planes of experience, this wrestling with the historical, the domestic, the personal and the national, is central to the Twilight Zone's concerns, and it culminates in a really impressive section of the book towards the end, in which autobiographical and national timelines are superimposed upon each other in a litany of events from the coup in 1973 to Pinochet's death in 2006. I found this section of the book extraordinarily moving. It's a tremendously powerful capstone to the book's intentions, and I highly recommend experiencing it. Chile's reckoning with its horrific past is by no means over, as is apparent from the recent election of the far-right president and Pinochet admirer José Antonio Cast. This book is a call to remember and seems more vital to read now than ever. In an interview with the New York Times magazine, Cormac McCarthy said, "The ugly fact is, books are made out of books. Sometimes, though, books provoke necessary responses yet to be written. And one hopes always that the right writer will come along to do so." The Sudanese writer Tayeb Salih's season of migration to the north is often described in terms of its relationship with other books. It's been variously termed a response to Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. It makes very frequent reference to Othello, and on the back cover of my copy it's called An Arabian Nights in Reverse. Though the book's merits would allow it to stand as a narrative on its own, there's no denying that it's a hyper-literate novel, and one that thrives on intertextuality and engages with both European and Arab traditions to construct its complex critique of the relationship between colonizer and colonized. At the beginning of the book, the unnamed narrator returns from England, where he's earned a doctorate studying the work of an obscure English poet, and arrives in his small village, his home village, at the bend of the Nile. While reveling in the sensation of homecoming, the feeling of rootedness that was unavailable to him in England, feeling not like a storm-swept feather, but like a palm tree, a being with a background, with roots. Not a stone thrown into the water, but a seed sown in a field. He notices a strange face among those whom he knew. The character of Mustafa, it transpires, in many ways holds up a mirror to his own life. He too has led an intellectual, academic, rootless and adventurous life in England. And it is to the narrator that he will unfold his violent and tragic tale. Mustafa Said is a really interesting character. He's cold, ambitious, and fiercely intelligent, and eventually becomes the author of several books on the economics of colonialism. He's one who views himself as a kind of living weapon, whose two keen edges are the intellect and the English language. Throughout the book, he'll make reference to this connection. In the intermediate school, I discovered other mysteries, amongst which was the English language. My brain continued on, biting and cutting like the teeth of a plough. Words and sentences formed themselves before me as though they were mathematical equations. And later, my mind was like a keen knife, but the language is not my language. Here one hears echoes of Caliban's words. You taught me language, and my profit on't is I know how to curse. Mustafa enacts, in Robert Irwin's words, a kind of post-colonial vengeance on the West. And the acts of violence or sexual conquest that he commits while in England are always framed in terms of this East-West dichotomy, wherein incomplete understanding is the governing element. When discussing his seduction of Anne Hammond, who proved easy prey, he describes the relationship in terms of Orientalist fantasies. When she saw me, she saw a dark twilight like a false dawn. Unlike me, she yearned for tropical climes, cruel suns, purple horizons. In her eyes, I was a symbol of all her hankerings. Recognizing the erasure, the incompleteness, the falsehood of these fantasies, Mustafa goes further in orientalizing himself, turning his bedroom into a Western dreamscape of Eastern luxuriance. The room was heavy with the smell of burning sandalwood and incense, and in the bathroom were pungent Eastern perfumes, lotions, unguents, powders and pills. My bedroom was like an operating theatre. When Mustafa is eventually tried for the murder of an English woman, he describes how the trial is turned into a conflict between worlds. The book is conscious of the ways in which these worlds are often constructed of dreams and illusions, and perhaps more often still, of words. Robert Irwin's lecture on the novel outlines some of the roles that words and stories play in this conflict between two worlds.
In the opening lines of the novel, the narrator starts to tell his story to a male audience. The fiction is that it's an orally delivered narrative. In this, it mirrors the 1001 Nights, or the Arabian Nights, whose stories were allegedly told by Scheherazade to King Shahryar, and within some of the stories told by Scheherazade, other stories have been boxed or nested. And boxed within the story told by the narrative type Salih's novel, we find the story of Mustafa Said, and among other things, the stories he tells to seduce white women. The stories Mustafa Said tells in order to seduce Isabella Seymour unmistakably echo those told by Othello in his wooing of Desdemona, cannibals which do each other eat, the anthropophagi, and men whose heads do grow beneath their shoulders, as Othello has it. The novel is dense with intertextual references to Othello, The Tempest, Richard III, Freud's writings, and Joseph Conrad's The Heart of Darkness, but also to the Quran, pre-Islamic poetry, Abu Nuwas, and the Arabian Nights. When Season of Migration appeared in its English translation, a reviewer in The Observer described it accurately enough as an Arabian Nights in reverse. In Salih's book, it's Europe that is the land of exotic marvels, a land where fish die of cold, and also a land of biddable women, or is that only a fantasy of Mustafa's?
Irwin will also go on to discuss the echoes of Bluebeard, particularly in the locked room that Mustafa leaves behind after his death. It is fitting, perhaps, that what the room contains, unlike the dead wives of the original tale, is a library, a room composed of English words, words just as capable of creation as they are of erasure, language that could be the bridge or the incendiary substance planted to explode it. This is a book about which I have far more to say than I have time for here, but I really encourage anyone who hasn't read this to seek it out. It's one that does such interesting things with the English tradition, repurposing it, bending it into new thought-provoking forms. For me, it makes an excellent case that we very much need books made out of other books, and that we should refrain from regarding canonical texts as conclusive. There's never any such thing as the last word. There are certain books whose construction and pacing feels faultless, songs without a false note, in which every moment, every bar is essential. There's an undeniable ecstasy in encountering the well-made thing. For me, Richard Yates's The Revolutionary Road is just such a book. There are writers whom one reads for periods in one's life and leaves behind without really knowing why. And with Richard Yates, that's really the case for me. I read a lot of his work in my 20s. I particularly loved the Easter Parade and the short stories. But for some reason, I never read the book that made his reputation. And I'm thrilled to have done so now, because it's been one of my favourite reading experiences of the year. The human stories that Yates tells draw on the very darkest corners of the mundane, those parts of life that are sources of the greatest dissatisfactions because they are ordinary, that cut so deep precisely because we recognise them as the small tragedies that occur when perhaps we're not looking, that escape our notice until it's too late. Revolutionary Road is ostensibly about the gradual breakdown of a marriage, but I think more properly is about the breakdown of belief in dreams and the promises of life. The novel excels at depicting on this micro scale the iterations of this decay, its flaring episodes of violence, its glacial silences. But it's the wider dissatisfactions, not just the growing sense of the illusions that Frank and April Wheeler begin to recognize in each other, that arrest the reader in their stark, hard-edged bleakness. The intensity with which the couple begin to blame their own failings upon their environment, both of them meant, of course, for better things, meant to be writers, to be actors, intellectuals, to be living in Paris, instead mired in suburbia, working soul-draining office jobs, raising a family in a middle-class neighborhood, dulled by the uninspiring company of their painfully ordinary neighbors. In his excellent characterization, Yates makes it clear that he's satirizing the Wheelers' delusions, their belief that they're destined to have extraordinary lives, as much as he is conformity itself. But their disillusionment expands outward too, into an insidious critique of the American 1950s idyll, until it becomes hard to determine whether they are the victims of suburban mundanity, or instead their own unacknowledged desire for conformity. In a 1972 interview, Richard Yates commented on the ways in which the plague of conformity represented a kind of betrayal of America's origins. During the 1950s, there was a general lust for conformity all over this country, by no means only in the suburbs, a kind of blind, desperate clinging to safety and security at any price, as exemplified politically in the Eisenhower administration and the Joe McCarthy witch hunts. Anyway, a great many Americans were deeply disturbed by all that, felt it to be an outright betrayal of our best and bravest revolutionary spirit. And that was the spirit I tried to embody in the character of April Wheeler. I meant the title to suggest that the revolutionary road of 1776 had come to something very much like a dead end in the 50s. For a novel with a distinctly realist flavour and concerned with interpersonal relationships, it's also alive with metaphorical undertones, images that echo its larger themes. Remaining alert to these was one of the great pleasures of reading the novel for me. The opening scene in which April Wheeler takes part in a failed performance with her amateur dramatics circle draws out the theme of performativity, the empty continuance of embodying roles one believes oneself to have chosen, but which in fact are derived from larger systems of societal expectation. The emphasis on the mechanical, the reproducible. We're told that Frank walks into his office at the Knox building like an automaton. The Knox company is producing a computer that can perform the lifetime work of a man with a desk calculator in 30 minutes. Frank himself reproduces his own father's career by working at precisely the same office. While viewing himself as made for an artistic life, he becomes a carbon copy of the previous generation. The Revolutionary Hill estates where the Wheelers moved in are described outwardly as a toyland of white and pastel houses with ice cream-coloured automobiles parked out front. The sterile unreality of these duplicated lives leaves no room for the darkest of emotions that begin to stir inside the Wheelers' home. Shadows in a shadowless land. In opposition to the mechanical and the reproducible, there are also the metaphors of growth and planting that bookend the whole novel, embodied in the plant gifted to the Wheelers by the estate agent, Mrs. Givings, which is said to thrive in acid soil. And this image may be expanded outward to the book's thematic emphasis on nurturing and its absence. In fact, in the same interview, Yeats comments on the theme of abortion. Everything gets aborted in the book. That was supposed to be the theme. It's built on a series of abortions of all kinds, an aborted play, several aborted careers, any number of aborted ambitions and aborted plans and aborted dreams. And it's this stunted, stifled progress of the lives depicted in the book that make it so painful to read. This is the harsh realism of the mirror that this book holds before us, in whose reflections one's own ambitions, plans, and dreams fail to play out. The dreams that, if unregarded, can so easily wither in the acid soil of life. If there are books about books, books made of books, then there are also books that feel written for the pure love of books, and this is certainly one of them. This one is a late comer to the list, as it's the last book that I read in 2025. I'm also a late comer to the book, I suppose, given that it's so well known. I'm talking about The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco, and it's one that I've been meaning to read for a really long time, but for some reason I've just resisted it. And I just adored it so much. It had the perfect balance of coziness and disquiet in a way that reminded me, strangely enough, of the short stories of M.R. James, and that made it utterly perfect to read around Christmas time. The book is set in the year 1327 at an Italian Benedictine abbey. The Sherlock Holmes-inspired William of Baskerville, a Franciscan, has been sent to investigate the death of one of the monks and to take part in a disputation in light of the renewed controversy surrounding the validity of apostolic poverty. At the heart of the mystery is the Abbey's extraordinary labyrinthine library, which William comes to view as the finest in Christendom, as is the matter of books and the written word. All is narrated by the now aged Adzo, who recalls this period of his life as a novice, toiling on the manuscript in his scriptorium as the great darkness approaches. The atmosphere among the monks is one of secrecy, suspicion, and silence. Underneath the highly ordered schedule of the day, from matins to vespers and compline, the scholarly focus on copying, preservation, the efficiency of the garden and the kitchen, there is sensible a kind of suppressed chaos and disorder, whose dark flutterings become more readily apparent as day after day several monks are found murdered. The vow of silence, the privacy of confession, hierarchy, and a climate of fear conspire to tauten the skin of that suppression to the tightness of a drum. The air grows pregnant with all that remains unspoken, the humming of an obscure evil. I found the world building in The Name of the Rose to be tremendously effective. The character and shape of the abbey itself is so well realized, and the reconstruction of the period is extraordinary, I think. Eco's research and knowledge of the thought and preoccupations of the Middle Ages plays no small role here. In his lecture, How I Write, he describes this process as a kind of play, which is apt given how much fun, how much of a pure joy it is to roam within his world.
What do I do during these years of literary pregnancy? I collect documents, I visit places, designing their map. I outline the section of the buildings, I sketch the faces of the characters, so that for The Name of the Rose I had the portraits of all the monks I had to mention. I spent those years in a sort of enchanted castle. Nobody knows what I am doing, not even the members of my family. I give the impression of doing a lot of different things, but I am always capturing ideas, images, words for my story.
One of the things I loved so much about the book was its clear demand to be read slowly. I found myself just lingering over every page and delighting in its language, just savouring everything. The prose, whether enumerating the substances in the herbalist's laboratory, the catalogue of certain portions of the library, narrating an action sequence, a dream vision or debate, whether heated or learned, even a sexual act, is always possessed of a certain monastic calm, which thrives on detail and intricacy. One sinks into it mesmerically, as the speed of modernity is gradually tuned out, and one enters a different, archaic frame of mind, whose deliberate pace encourages the same attention to detail from the reader. In a scene in which Adzo, the narrator, commits his great sin with a girl he meets in the kitchen, this quality is on full display.
I was immediately convinced that my scruples were indeed devilish, for nothing could be more right and good and holy than what I was experiencing, the sweetness of which grew with every moment. As a little drop of water added to a quantity of wine is completely dispersed and takes on the color and taste of wine, as red-hot iron becomes like molten fire, losing its original form, as air when it is inundated with the sun's light is transformed into total splendor and clarity, so that it no longer seems illuminated, but rather seems to be light itself. So I felt myself die of tender liquefaction, and I had only the strength left to murmur the words of the psalm. Behold, my bosom is like new wine, sealed, which bursts new vessels.
The novel is also possessed of an incredible, intricate architecture, Over the course of 7 days, the world of the Abbey is created with one hand and dismantled with the other. Its unmaking feeling like the utterly necessary conclusion of the book's meticulous plotting, the many threads that are announced, the disputes between the Emperor and the Catholic Church, the centrality of the question of apostolic poverty, the threat of a schism, the matter of the virtue of comedy, an emergent scientific method in William's detection, the preservation of knowledge, too many ideas to mention here. They're all woven together so satisfyingly in the book's denouement. I'm so conscious of not doing the book justice in the short time that I have here, but I suppose I'll just be content with saying a few things that I admired about it so much. I adored it for its richness, its love of books, of languages and libraries for their own sake, for its humour, its generous recognition of the contrary states of the human soul, but most of all for its patience, and for my knowledge that it will be patient enough to wait for the day when I pick it up again, as I inevitably will, knowing that there are endless pleasures to be found, discoveries to be made within its pages. It's a trite sentiment that happiness writes white, but perhaps it's true that optimism in literature is hard to come by. At least it is in my own experience, in the literary directions that my taste tends towards. Increasingly, when these moments of respite from the horrors of the world come, I find myself immensely grateful. This year I read finally another major writer whom I'd resisted for a really long time. Again, I don't know why. I read 2 novels by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, The Extraordinary 100 Years of Solitude, and another that I think I enjoyed even more, and it's Love in the Time of Cholera. I read it in this pretty everyman edition, and it was one of the most beautiful and joyous reading experiences for me this year. Love in the Time of Cholera is a novel of slow, rich motion. Its progress, achingly languorous, voluptuously descriptive, sensual and tender, is a perfect accompaniment to its thematic interests. It's a tale of longing, of long-held promises, of late flowering, whose emotional munificence is heard in the gradual swelling of its strings, its cresting current of rich chords. As is perhaps evident from the title, it's a love story, but a rather unconventional one. It's one that follows the love between 2 characters, Florentino Ariza, an aimless young poet and violinist, florid and impulsive, and Fermina Daza, a sturdy, headstrong and sheltered young woman, from its germ as wild infatuation and obsessive pursuit, through passionate correspondence, and ultimately, or perhaps I should say penultimately, rejection. Undeterred by this rejection by Fermina Daza and her subsequent marriage to Dr. Juvenal Urbino, Florentino holds on to his love for decades, promising himself that he will declare it once again the very moment that Fermina's husband dies. And we follow these 2 characters for decades, watching their lives crisscross and intersect as they're unable to lose sight of each other entirely, each becoming a ghostly presence on the periphery of the other's existence, a glow, an oscillating, wavering halo whose inconstant illumination only seems so when fate intervenes or focus is momentarily lost. The promise of the book, its generosity, lies in the idea that there can exist such eternal things, that the luster of true feeling can remain, though changed in shape and composition, through all the beatings and storms by which it is assailed, ultimately undiminished. The unnamed city, based seemingly on the Colombian port, Cartagena, is really richly drawn too, and it provides a tremendously fitting backdrop to the story. Its simultaneous grandeur and decay, its great age and its squalor emerge in perfect concert in Dr. Juvenal Urbino's consideration of it.
His city stood unchanging on the edge of time. The same burning dry city of his nocturnal terrors and the solitary pleasures of puberty, where flowers rusted and salt corroded, where nothing had happened for 4 centuries except a slow aging among withered laurels and putrefying swamps. In winter, sudden devastating downpours flooded the latrines and turned the streets into sickening bogs. In summer, an invisible dust as harsh as red-hot chalk was blown into even the best protected corners of the imagination by mad winds that took the roofs off the houses and carried away children through the air.
Like the rich, multifaceted character of the city in the novel, the book isn't without its sour notes, not just in terms of the heartache, sorrow, death and epidemic that underpin the grand romance at its core, but also in the treatment of its main theme, in the book's exploration of love in so many of its forms, as Michael Palencia Roth enumerates: love between old people, love between adolescents, love between an old man and a young virgin, love with prostitutes, love as infidelity, epistolary love, platonic love, interracial love, masochistic love. There is an extended episode of grooming and paedophilia whose violent impact leaves an irreparable hairline fracture deep in the bones of the narrative. I can imagine that this is quite a transformative point in the book for a lot of people, and something that represents a kind of shattering of its purity, and some might question why it's there. One could even see it as a pivotal exposure of the nature of Florentino's desires, retroactively colouring even his pursuit of Fermina Daza in far darker shades. This is certainly a possibility. For me, however, despite its ugliness, I see it as an extension of Marquez's approach to his subject, his attempt to draw nearer the subject of love, at least heterosexual love, as an anatomist, outlining both its most becoming hues and those that inspire only disgust. Love and sickness, as perhaps in certain lights, not so far apart after all, as even the title suggests. The culmination of the story on the riverboat has so often been described, and rightly so in my opinion, as utterly masterful. In his introduction to my edition, Nicholas Shakespeare claims that if he could be a fly on any wall in literature, he would choose the cabin of a Colombian riverboat in the mid-1920s. In his New York Times review, Thomas Pynchon said, "There is nothing I've read quite like this astonishing final chapter, symphonic, sure in its dynamics and tempo, moving like a riverboat too." And it is utterly astonishing for its warmth, its tenderness, for its pure sensation of requital, as though the reader had had their own love returned. What stood out for me, though, was the counterpoint of the landscape's devastation, which throws the long-held love of our main characters into even sharper relief.
Florentino Arisa, in fact, was surprised by the changes, and would be even more surprised the following day when navigation became more difficult and he realized that the Magdalena, father of waters, one of the great rivers of the world, was only an illusion of memory. Captain Samaritano explained to them how 50 years of uncontrolled deforestation had destroyed the river. The boilers of the riverboats had consumed a thick forest of colossal trees that had oppressed Florentino Arisa on his first voyage. Fermina Dace would not see the animals of her dreams. The hunters for skins from the tanneries in New Orleans had exterminated the alligators that, with yawning mouths, had played dead for hours on end in the gullies along the shore as they lay in wait for butterflies. The parrots with their shrieking and the monkeys with their lunatic screams had died out as the foliage was destroyed. The manatees with their great breasts that had nursed their young and wept on the banks in a forlorn woman's voice were an extinct species, annihilated by the armored bullets of hunters for sport.
In contrast with this changing landscape, there could be no clearer indication that love conquers all, that love is not love which alters when it alteration finds, than the novel's final word, which stands against the ravages of time, a single word in dialogue that seems to me to encompass the book in its entirety, forever. I read so many wonderful books this year that I wanted to offer a few honourable mentions before I come to my favourite book of the year. As anyone who watches the channel knows already, I undertook a bit of a journey into Latin American literature this year, so there are a lot of books that I really admired but I wasn't able to include here. The Mario Vargas Llosa book, Conversation in the Cathedral, was quite extraordinary, really challenging and stylistically interesting. I would have included The Obscene Bird of Night by José Donoso if I felt I could talk about it sensibly without rereading it in its entirety. I will at some point soon. I also really enjoyed the second book that I'd read by Fernanda Melchor, Paradise. I think I enjoyed it even more than Hurricane Season. In terms of other books, I really enjoyed Justin Isis's latest publication, The Aristocracy of Weak Nerves, which very nearly made it to this list. Sorry, Justin. I'm still waiting for Girl Revolution to come out. There are certain writers by whom one is utterly seduced, who can weave a tale that cocoons the heart, whose words dissolve to become currents in the bloodstream. Such encounters are rare, but when they strike, there's no mistaking them. This was my experience with the Chilean writer Pedro Lemebel, whose My Tender Matador was easily my favourite novel of all those that I read this year, and by far the most extraordinary reading experience that I had. I spoke in my last video about how much I enjoyed his Crónicas, but it's the novel that I fell in love with first. Like the Crónicas, it is suffused with his personality, its irreverence, its plurality, the forcefulness of his political convictions, but also its femininity, its romance, its alertness to beauty and colour, to all the things endangered by the political violence of the regime under which he wrote and in whose aftermath he published the novel. At the heart of the book is the so-called Queen of the Corner, who in the book's parlance is a loca, that is, in South America, a flamboyantly effeminate homosexual, though not always transgender, and often associated with sex work. Gwendolyn Harper, the translator of the Crónicas, calls it an identity that is simultaneously uncompromising and malleable. And this malleability is reflected in the protean, fluid mix of pronouns ascribed to the main character. The Queen of the Corner lives on the edge of poverty, working as a seamstress, sewing and embroidering gorgeous fabrics for wealthy patrons, wallowing in the cloying sentimentality of the old romantic songs, just like that from which the novel's title is taken. Her run-down Santiago apartment in a scrawny block is her private refuge, and her desire for beauty easily triumphs over her strained circumstances.
Aquella casa primaveral del 86 era su tibieza. Tal vez lo único amado, el único espacio propio que tuvo en su vida, la loca del frente. Por eso el afán de decorar sus muros como torta nupcial, embeturnando las cornisas con pájaros, abanicos, enredaderas de no me olvides y esas mantillas de Manila que colgaban del piano invisible.
This private space becomes something else when the character of Carlos enters her life. He's a young dissident involved in the resistance movement against the Pinochet regime. Carlos requests the use of this private space to store some boxes. What is inside them is not revealed immediately. Is it perhaps samizdat publications, revolutionary literature, something more incendiary still, perhaps weapons? The unknown contents of the boxes are mirrored by the emergent sexual tension between Carlos and the Queen, which dances upon an obscure tightrope between declaration and silence, between true requital and the wound of exploitation. At the same time, under the influence of Carlos, the Queen's political consciousness begins to emerge more freely and radically, reawakening like a dew-stained flower bud at first light. In the original Spanish used to describe her, La Loca del Frente, there is an embedded pun that makes this political consciousness apparent. Del Frente meaning both across the street, but also an allusion to the FPMR, or the Frente Patriótico Manuel Rodriguez, which planned the assassination of Pinochet. In an interview, Lemebel discusses the tension at the heart of this relationship between the Queen and Carlos.
Alguien me preguntó si ella había sido utilizada por el frente, ¿no? Que es la lectura más obvia, ¿no? En realidad este personaje siempre supo de qué se trataba, pero no quería que le contaran la verdad. Quería seguir ilusoriamente pensando que había algo de ella que hacía que esto ocurriera en su casa y que motivaba a que el chico, digamos, estuviera ahí. ¿Te fijas? Siempre sabía ella, como las madres de los homosexuales que siempre saben, ¿no? La loca sabía de qué se trataba esto, pero no quería que él se lo dijera, ¿no? Que guardar, que ese no decir era quizás el eslabón de la cadena que los unía.
The character of the relationship, which remains unlabeled and indeterminate, allows the Queen to spin romantic and even sexual fantasies, most memorably in the extraordinary scene of illicit fellatio upon the sleeping Carlos that takes place on the border between dream vision and reality, and shows Lemebel's outlandishly gorgeous prose in full flight.
Es un trabajo de amor. Reflexionaba al escuchar la respiración agitada de Carlos en la inconsciencia etílica. No podía ser otra cosa, pensó al sentir en ese paladar el pálpito de ese animalito recobrando la vida. Con la finura de una geisha, lo empuñó extrayéndolo de su boca, lo miró erguirse frente a su cara y con la lengua afilada en una flecha, dibujó con un cosquilleo baboso el aro mora de la calva reluciente. Es un arte de amor, se repetía incansable, oliendo los vapores de macho etrusco que exhalaba ese hongo lunar. Las mujeres no saben de esto, supuso. Ellas solo lo chupan, En cambio, las locas elaboran un bordado cantante en la sinfonía de su mamar. Las mujeres succionan nada más. En tanto, la boca loca, primero, aureola de vaho el ajuar del gesto. La loca solo degusta, y luego trina su catadura lírica por el micrófono carnal que expande su radiofónica libación. Es como cantar, concluyó, interpretarle a Carlos un himno de amor directo al corazón.
Alongside this relationship, there's another strand of the novel that takes us into the dictator's head in a way that is both satirical and irreverent, but surprisingly tender at times. Some of the book's humour emerges from this portrait, but as much as we are privy to the dictator's egotism and brutality, we also witness his loneliness, the emptiness of his relationships. Remember with him a birthday party thrown when he was a child to which no one came. These two strands of the book never feel separate, however. Lemebel weaves subtle mirrorings between them, echoes that announce their eventual collision. Lemebel has said that he's not a writer who reads an awful lot, that he takes just as much influence from the language that he hears on the streets, and it's hard not to imagine that this is part of what makes his prose so supple, colourful and lyrical, so wonderfully alert to spoken rhythms, something which is admirably conveyed in Catherine Silver's translation. What results is a book that feels utterly alive. There are so many things I adore about it that I can hardly note them all here, but I suppose I should say that it's one of the most elegantly constructed, rich and thoughtful books that I've read in a long time. And it's one that I've thought so often about from the moment I turned its last page, and it continues to live in me, and will do so, I'm sure, for as long as I live. Looking back at my reading throughout this year, and perhaps particularly at the books that I included on this list, I'm aware that a lot of my choices are perhaps things that are better known than those that I usually talk about. And I don't think of that as a bad thing at all. You know, anything that's new to me still feels like a discovery. And so I'm really happy with the choices that I made in terms of my reading. As far as next year goes, I don't have any rigid or concrete plans. I'll certainly be continuing with my exploration of Latin American literature, that's for sure. But I think something else will come along to sit beside it. There's usually some particular area or theme that I turn to. If you made it this far in the video, thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel or sharing it somewhere online or with a bookish friend. That really helps me to get exposed to new people, so I'd be really grateful if you could do that for me. Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks so much for watching once again, and I'll see you next time.